This is Tooting Library on Mitcham Road here near Tooting Broadway. I'm here today to record a book event, a special event organized by Tooting Library in the honor of Salma Siddiqui, the author of the Migrant book. She is launching today from this library. Let's go inside and see what's happening. Assalamu alaikum, everyone here. Welcome. All of you welcome here to this event, special event for launching the book written by Salma Siddiqui, The Migrants. I have some speakers here who will introduce and talk about Salma Siddiqui more than I could. Dr. David Grant will be speaking first. Mrs. Huma will be second, and Sana Gutri will be speaking the last and talking about the author, what they have found in the book, if they have read the book. I haven't read the book, sorry to say that. Reason is very simple. That because I have been living with a partner 40 years and I've been hearing the story for the last 10 years, all is absorbed in me. I can sometimes make corrections and she gets very upset. So I think she will excuse me today in saying that. But here we are. I'd like to open the event and I'd like to invite Dr. David Grant to say a few words for Salma Siddiqui.
We're here to hear Salma, so I'm going to be very brief. My wife Anne and I have known Salma and Asif for 40 years now. We did research together at St George's, and then we were very lucky to be invited to Lahore when they were in Pakistan about 15-20 years ago now. So we visited Lahore, Islamabad, Rawalpindi, the Murray Hills, etc. So it was a wonderful, wonderful visit, and it helped to put in context the story in the book, the culture and life and society in Pakistan, and then coming over here to England. I was lucky enough to be given the copy of the book 2 years ago. I have read it, Asif, all 570 pages of it, which is very impressive. But then the front piece this morning I noticed said this is Salma's first novel, and I just asked her, it's not a novel, it's an autobiography. It is about her life and her family. And I have to say, the first half, she paints a very, very colourful picture of life in Pakistan when she was a child, and she certainly wasn't a very good child. Lots of naughty things she got up to, and then there's an interesting piece about the historical upheaval of the partition, which we all know about, and then coming over to England and integrating, that's the wrong word, coming into England and maintaining the Pakistani culture but also the English culture together, which she and Asif and the family have done very, very successfully. So I really enjoyed the book. I can say it was a couple of years ago since I read it, and I will read it again. But I can recommend it to you. It's a very, very interesting autobiography about life in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when everything was in a bit of a melting pot, and how she and the family integrated or came to England and led a very successful life. I have to say, the one thing that comes through with Salma, having worked with her and known her for a long time, she is not someone to take no for an answer. She is a very, very determined, very, very busy lady. And even now she's writing textbooks for A-level students for biological sciences, and is a well-respected tutor as well. So she is a lady to be respected. So anyway, that's all I want to say, because we need to hear Salma.
Found a way of persuading her at times, giving the reason, the logic, and sometimes she says, you are thinking logically than me, so she's become more emotional in topics, and I try to avoid confrontation in that way. So I think it's been wonderful being with her. Anyhow, I like to invite now Huma to say a few words and what she has experienced, been knowing Salma, and let's hear what she has to say.
Salma gave me her book to read. Luckily we were in a lockdown, so I had lots of time to read her book and keep going back. Hundreds of characters, you lose thread of who is who as you're gradually reading. So you have to turn the page over and over again as to who the cousin is, who's the mamu is, who's the khala, aunt. Anyway, I finished it. So here it is. Salma asked me to say a few words about the book. Now, my immediate sense I got after reading Salma's book was that it is a tribute to her parents who had endured, in fact, 2 migrations in their lifetime. One, a very traumatic one in 1947, and then to UK, both equally painful and resulting in separation from their loved ones. She acknowledges their effort and sacrifices made by them for the family. The narrative successfully captures their loving relationship throughout the difficult times, one of them being when her father and mother were separated for 3 years when he decides to move to UK. She has brought characters to life for the readers with the detail in personality and context. This is partly done through conversations with her family members and later with her own observations. Her writing is open and sincere. I smiled many times while reading at her description of events. I burst out laughing too a few times. Sometimes it seemed that Salma is thinking in Urdu language and had translated her thought spontaneously in English. It makes reading the book entertaining. The book depicts a typical communal Asian family structure, wonderfully where it is a support network and yet an intrusive one, restricting individual freedom. There is a continuous thread of appreciation of her parents' effort to provide the best for their children. She wants to confirm to them that their sacrifices were worth it. Then there is a surprise in the story. As the reader is happily reading on about the journey and the achievements in UK, when in the final pages, the reader is suddenly alerted to something a little different. It is just 4 words on the, I think, the last few pages. The words are, what have we lost as a result of the moves? Which suddenly become very interesting. These words make me wonder, what was the cost of the sacrifices made by the family, in her opinion? And this is a question mark. Salma does talk about the intergenerational conflict and culture clash in her book. Is this what she means? She seems a little disappointed on that page. Perhaps this can be the next literary effort for her.
I'm a 2nd generation, born and raised here in Tooting, and I actually worked in this library on a weekend job, so it's especially honoured to be here today. Partition is a word that I grew up knowing very little about. Events were often referred to as pre-partition or post-partition, but the word itself and the event itself was something that was always shrouded in mystery for me. I learnt to recognise from my family that this word carried a lot of baggage that wasn't to be unpacked. As an adult, I did my own learning. I opened my eyes to the socio-political history of my family's journey. But it wasn't until my aunt shared early drafts of this book with me that I was able to get a sense of what it actually meant to the people that I know and love. I've read hundreds of books where I related to the characters, but this is the first book I've ever read where I'm literally related to the characters. These protagonists are people that I know beyond the pages. My mother-in-law's friend wrote to me after reading the book and said that she could not put it down. She wrote, I must confess that I had no idea of the flights they had to make and the obstacles which they faced upon arrival to England. But what a success story, overcoming such adversity. Please let your auntie know just how much it meant to me to read it. She's a born storyteller. Yesterday we celebrated my brother Zishan's wedding. So it feels pertinent to read an excerpt from a chapter called Baji's Wedding, particularly as Baji happens to be my own mother, Najma. A few days before the wedding, our house turned into a mandi. Huge gas stoves and pans were hired from Southall. Abu and Uncle Ajaz purchased bags of rice, spices, sugar, saffron, almonds, pistachios, drinks, paper napkins, and rolls of disposable table covers and crockery, and cutlery to feed 500 guests from Ranjan's wholesale warehouse. Abu calculated it was cheaper to purchase the crockery and cutlery once and for all than to hire it for each of his 6 children's weddings. These plates and cutlery were stored in our cellar and loaned to the entire Asian community for years to come, until Ummi got fed up of keeping track and donated them to charity after we were all married. Ummi and Auntie Shirley opted to cook biryani in our back garden. Mrs. Iqbal was nominated to make zarda, sweet rice, and Mrs. Farooq the korma. Auntie Shirley carefully weighed out the required ingredients ready to be dispatched to each of our Ummi's friends who volunteered to cook. Our next door neighbours, Tom and Barbara, were used to our eccentric family and knew what was going on, but even they couldn't believe their eyes when they saw Ummi standing on a wooden crate, stirring the huge cauldron of curry with an oar. They stood taking photographs. Had social media been what it is today, the images would certainly have circled the globe.
As David said, I'm a scientist and I write biology books. So on a whim, I joined creative writing classes, and I realized when I read my work to fellow students and to my colleagues that they were really intrigued about Asian lifestyle and what goes on behind closed doors. And most importantly, I was really amazed that even people of my generation had no idea about partition. And anyway, I couldn't write my story without telling the story of how my parents came to be here. So anyway, I'll just read a little extract from the beginning here, and then I'll read an extract regarding the partition, because on 14th of August we just celebrated 75th independence of Pakistan, and this event was organized very, very kindly by Heather to commemorate this big event. This is the story of a migrant family who left their motherland, sacrificing all that was dear to them in search of a better future. It is based on stories I have heard mostly from my mother and the treasure trove of my own memories, which have deliquesced into my being from an early age. Those stories and memories are part of my heritage, intrinsic to who I am. I share them here with you before they too disappear like the people who inhabit these pages. As David has already said that I'm a scientist, but doing these classes I thought I must add this to my narrative. Considering we've just celebrated the 75th independence, I'm just going to read about the partition. So I hope those who don't know too much about it can learn a little bit. On the eve of 14th August 1947, the 27th of Ramzan, the holiest of holy nights in the Islamic calendar, when Muslims all over the world pray for peace and forgiveness, India was dissected into 3: East Pakistan, West Pakistan, and India. Overnight, nearly 20 million people found themselves on the wrong side of the border. The religious fury and violence partition unleashed resulted in the biggest exodus of mankind in human history. More than 1 million Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs died, and countless were wounded. 75,000 women were abducted, raped, and separated from their families. As the demand for independence from the British came to head, the political situation in India deteriorated. War-weary and desperate to get out without too much blood on their hands, the British government dispatched Louis Mountbatten to India as Viceroy with a clear mandate for transfer of British sovereignty in India to a single independent nation within the Commonwealth by June 1948. Mountbatten gathered the 4 top Indian leaders: Muhammad Ali Jinnah, leader of the All Indian Muslim League; Nehru and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, leader of Indian independence movement, and Mohandas Gandhi, the religious leader who became an icon figure for civil rights and the freedom movement in India. Mountbatten listened to their views on a feasible exit strategy on the formation of a united country. Having failed for an agreement, and with increasing unrest in the country, Mountbatten reluctantly agreed to the partition of India along sectarian lines by 14th and 15th August 1947. Dates picked out of thin air by Nehru, the same date as Japan's surrender under World War II. The decision was made public by National Radio on 3rd June 1947. British Prime Minister Attlee summoned a British lawyer, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, from the court where he was presiding judge to draw the line on the map of the subcontinent, a place he'd never before visited, to segregate it into Pakistan and India. Radcliffe had just 5 weeks to complete the mammoth task of carving up a land of over 350 million inhabitants with a multitude of religions and opposing beliefs, languages and culture. Without knowing anything about the land, he was segregating and having only outdated maps, and the police and the border security force stood and watched helplessly. The ill-prepared Gurkhas under an inexperienced British command had no chance against the suppressed long-life hatred, anger and carnage that ensued. Endless caravans of destitute migrants crossed the North Indian Peninsula, disposing the dead on the way. In death, there was no distinction between Hindu, Muslim and Sikh. Torn and broken, their lives in tatters, their dreams shattered, caught in a land grab and territorial battle, men became demonic beasts, killing for the sake of killing. Their gods, in whose name a new nation was being formed, looked on, and on Ashraful Makhluq, his finest creation, transformed into devil himself. The inescapable, unbearable stench of rotting or burning flesh remained with these people for the rest of their lives, sometime forever. It wasn't just the living that were desecrated and destroyed. Mosques, gurdwaras and temples were set ablaze. The roads, railways and bridges the British had so meticulously built, the lifeline on which the economic prosperity of India was built, were gashed by explosion. As blood filled the craters, it ran over the lawless roads like veins in an old...
I just changed the mood a little bit. Yeah. So this is about her parents' wedding day. I'm not going into very much detail, but this is the interesting bit in her book. On their wedding day, Ammi's sisters and friends continued their teasing late into the night, refusing to let Abu leave with his wife. Eventually, just a choice of words, it's really interesting. He whisked the bride off her feet, slung the coy bundle over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, and dashed out of the house so fast that the women were left aghast. On breathlessly reaching home, he dumped his shocked wife on the bed. She gaped at her abductor, horrified yet bemused. They looked at each other and burst into uncontrollable laughter. So the scene she sets with her words are lovely, and that's where I laughed.
Thank you. This is a serious book, and perhaps it sound too whimsical, so we finally decided calling it The Migrants. And funnily enough, last week I did a reading in Tooting, where South Asian Heritage Month they were celebrating, and a gentleman, I don't know how he's done that, there's a plaque to be unveiled, I think on 10th of September in Tooting Market to celebrate the contribution of migrants to Tooting. So, that it's a blue plaque, and I was really, really chuffed to, see that plaque, and this is going to be unveiled on 10th of September in Tooting Market. And during that program, that event, we discussed but there were many migrants from all over Asia. We discussed the contribution of the migrants to Tooting and to UK in general. And it was really eye-opening to see how far we've come. So I'm very proud of that. I mean, I'm a very proud Britisher, but I have a great love for Pakistan. So here I am. And Imran Khan, yeah. When will you be there?
At the moment, I don't plan to go.
We're going on 27th, which we're planning to go.
We're going to meet in Switzerland. We have a festival. But Dalai Lama's sister is coming.